This is Sarnia Lambton Daily for Monday, April 27th. Good evening, I'm Terry Doyle. Many people came into today waiting for Ontario Premier Doug Ford to announce the reopening plan for the province of Ontario. But today's announcement gave no specific details as to what can reopen and when. The provincial government put out a framework of 3 phases for the eventual reopening of Ontario. It would not start until there is a consistent decrease of new daily COVID-19 cases over a 2 to 4 week period and fewer patients in hospitals. The province would also make sure there is sufficient access to personal protective equipment, testing numbers, and at least 90% of new COVID-19 contacts can be reached by public health within 24 hours, cutting down on further spread. Stage 1 would allow businesses previously forced to close to potentially reopen if they can meet public health guidelines, such as curbside pickup or delivery. This would also allow some parks and outdoor spaces to reopen and increase the number of people who can attend some events, such as funerals. Stage 1 would also see extensive protection for vulnerable people continue. Stage 2 would allow more workplaces to reopen based on risk. This would also include some service industries and additional office and retail workplaces. The second stage would see more outdoor spaces opened and some larger public gatherings. While Stage 3 would see all workplaces reopen responsibly, larger public gatherings such as concerts and sporting events will continue to be restricted for the foreseeable future. Once again, there were no specific timelines issued and no specific industries mentioned.
Working closely with our health experts, our government has developed a framework for reopening Ontario's economy. This framework is a roadmap. It will guide our collective decision-making. It lays out the threshold we need to hit, the targets we need to work towards. Number 1, virus spread and containment. Number 2, health system capacity. Number 3, public health system capacity. And number 4, incident tracking capacity. The framework is about how we're reopening, not when we're reopening. And let me be crystal clear. As long as this virus remains a threat to Ontario, we will continue to take every precaution necessary.
And we are all eager to reopen the province. But I know from speaking to my constituents in Ajax and people across the province that we're also cautious. We don't want our hard work and sacrifice to be for nothing. That's exactly why we'll take a gradual, staged approach to reopening the province. We are releasing this framework today because while you're doing your part, whether that's working on the front lines or staying home to keep each other safe, our government is doing ours by charting the course for what comes next. The reopening phase of our plan will happen in 3 stages. We aren't going to reopen everything at once. Instead, we're listening carefully to the advice of our health professionals and opening in a way that's responsible, assessing progress for 2 to 4 week periods before going further. In each stage, there will be a natural progression in how workplaces, services, and public spaces can operate. Those that are lower risk or can immediately meet public health guidance will open first. And as we continue to get the outbreak under control, we'll continue to ease the restrictions.
Locally, there remains 2 outbreaks at Sarnia seniors' residences. Landmark Village is continuing, but the numbers there are currently steady, while officials are optimistic as to what they are seeing at Vision Nursing Home.
The Vision outbreak currently stands at 2 staff cases and 3 cases in residence. I understand that the mass screening was done at that home, and we're still waiting for some of the results, I believe. But certainly it's been several days and no additional positives beyond what we've reported have come back. So that's in some ways, negatives are sort of trickling in, and we have to match them to the folks in the home. And but it's looking okay so far. We just have to keep an eye on it.
Let's drop into Sarnia City Hall now and check in with Mayor Mike Bradley. And Mike, we've come off another weekend as we continue to roll through this. Anything new, earth-shattering come out over the weekend that seemed to stand out as we move into, I've lost track of how many weeks we're into this now?
Well, it's 6 weeks. We've been in an emergency mode in Sarnia since March 18th. And it's been a long 6 weeks for everyone, not just the people at City Hall, not just the responders. Everyone out there is feeling the anxiety And as the weather gets better, and we're supposed to be having a beautiful day today, it gets tougher for people because they want to get back to somewhat of their normal life. But it wasn't, this weekend was fairly quiet for both police and fire. And, we've talked about this before, but it's that 80-20% rule that we've had good cooperation from 80% of the public. 20% are defiant for whatever reason, and in some cases just don't know the rules. You do find out that people don't sometimes pay a lot of attention to the media and stuff like that. I think the good news is in the last week there have been no deaths in Sarnia, and that about half the people that were infected have recovered. So that's good news for us to wrap our minds around, that we are making progress. And I think the big thing that's going to happen today, obviously, is the Premier's announcement on the exit strategy. I don't envy the situation he's in, because if we exit too soon and then we have another wave and people start dying again in large numbers, then he'll wear responsibility for that. It's a very tough call to make. But I do believe that the public needs to see some hope. They need to see that there's a plan in place, that you can go back to restaurants and such a day. You can start to have some sort of a normal life with some of the conditions of like distancing still and other things that we still need to do. But I think people need to see some light.
And you're hopeful too that people that are in the 80% where there are, or even maybe that last 20%, just be a little bit more patient, because if we do see a light at the end of the tunnel, hold on a little longer and then we can move forward.
Well, Terry, that's a good point. Patience is everything. But if you've been locked down now in the 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks, whenever you chose to do so, I think you've adjusted. I talk to people every day by telephone, teleconferences, and they don't like it, but they've adjusted and they've adapted their lifestyle. One of the things I'm finding with a lot of friends and people I know is that they're going to the grocery store every 2 weeks. They're going to the drugstore every 2 weeks. It's the same pattern I follow. I'm trying to minimize my exposure. And as you see those case numbers comes down, that's very gratifying, because it's obvious that the self-isolation and the distancing has had an impact in the community, and we're seeing that in the medical statistics.
How much of a challenge is it as you've gone through this? And it's all challenging, of course, but the province and the feds, but in most cases the province, they make their decisions, and then the primary control group here locally has to sort of interpret it a little bit, because it's all a changing pattern sometimes day to day.
Well, it is, and we have a very dedicated team on the COVID hotline, which now has had over 700 phone calls, most of them looking for information. But we have to interpret the lawn cutting regulations. We have to interpret other things, and people are often calling about who's on the non-essential or essential business list. Well, we don't control that list. We just try to interpret it. So that's been difficult, but I also realize when they put out that list of 17 pages of essential businesses back in March, that it was a very difficult list to compile, and they've adjusted it a little bit. I'm expecting today there may be some more adjustments to it as we head into spring, and they've made some judgments on what can reopen. So that, I think, would be helpful to the public, but just making sure that all of the conditions, look at the supermarkets, look at the liquor stores. There are setups now that are protecting people, everything from the barriers to how people can line up. And so I don't think that's going to go away, at least for the rest of this year.
I guess, too, we've seen it where it's been that slow crawl maybe towards some of the restrictions and some of the changes, where you probably couldn't necessarily do it all at once because we didn't know what kind of situation we're in. We saw the schools close for 3 weeks, then close for another 28 days, now to the end of May at least. I guess that's the thing where in some ways it would have been nice just to pull the Band-Aid off right away, but this is all new to everyone.
Well, my view from going back 4 or 5 weeks was, and we talked, was we should have shut the whole province down, just taken as much pain as possible and reduced the curve so much. But that didn't happen. I think if you parse what the Prime Minister is saying daily, I mean, it's hard politically for people to be negative towards their own constituents. But he's been very clear that this is not over yet, and it's going to go on for quite some time. How it unfolds in our society is going to be the real issue, and that's why the Ford announcement is important. But it'll take us some time to analyze it, digest it, and then understand what the ramifications are locally. I will say with the federal government, last week, as you know, you were here, the City Council cut $1.7 million from our budget, and my view was that was our contribution to the COVID war. If there's more monies coming from the Fed down the road, we'll certainly accept those if we can use them in a real valuable way for taxpayers. So the situation's still changing, but I go back to the Prime Minister's direction, and I will be raising, and I have raised this past weekend with the County of Lambton. What are they doing to help the businesses locally? We've made a substantial cut to our budget, $1.7 million. What are they going to do to help offset that? Because they're a big part of that tax bill. So there's all these things that are shifting all the time, but I think that we're feeling a bit more optimistic about where we're going as a community, and we're feeling more optimistic about we've got some control now on this horrid virus.
And I guess, too, when you look at those cuts that were made last week, some of those things were probably, like Showmobile was in there. Well, I don't think we're going to see too many shows this summer by any means, the way things are certainly going. Does that at least, though, give you some flexibility where if some needs come up versus wants, at least there isn't that sort of trying to play financial catch-up later on?
Well, the Showmobile was a pet project of my own. The former council cut it and didn't restore it, so brought it forward. I accept fully it's been deferred for a year or two. That's the way it's going to be. Yes, it does give us the ability. There's other discussions going on with our employees about taking time off and with the administration, because one of the concerns is, say August 1st is the D-Day when everything happens. We can't afford then to have everyone go off on vacation and use their time up. So we're trying to do a spacing of that so that people will take time off now. For example, my assistant, Janice, she's got a lot of time because of her longevity here. She's taking every Wednesday off. And that way, hopefully, she can get some time later in the year. We're doing things internally that also will have some cost impacts. So it is that 1.7, which I would point out, was cut unanimously by City Council, which is fairly rare, is a good way of getting some breathing space for us to see what happens. Because I am concerned, just listening to what I hear out there in the restaurant. I wrote a letter to the Prime Minister and the Premier last week about the restaurant business alone. It is the one I think that has taken the hit so hard at the beginning because they went from cash flow and customers to zero. And some are doing takeout, but that's not going to make the difference at the end. So, we're looking at where we can move the community forward, but I am concerned that we could see a 20 or 30% bankruptcy default rate in not just restaurants, but other businesses, because they just can't get back to where they were before this happened.
Are you concerned that some levels of government might have to really get into deep debt while something like this, proactive cuts, could avoid that here?
Well, the fact is the federal and provincial government before this were in deep debt. And one of my crusades over the years, we went from 100 million in debt as a city. We're down to just a few million now. And that means that we're self-financing what we do. We're just putting a lot more money into roads this year, into the urban part of the community, into roads to pave. We're doing that because we don't have to pay our debt. Our debt was running at 13 or 14 cents on the dollar, every dollar we collected. Now, the one thing that it's more of an insider baseball thing, but I need to raise it, is when the economy starts to come back, the federal and provincial governments will be the beneficiary to help pay their debt because they have all these taxes that are based on progression, whether it be a sales tax, all these other things. They'll come back and they'll have a rip-roaring amount of money coming in. Cities can only tax properties. So we will not get the benefit of the restoration of the economy, except it will stop the bleeding as it relates to businesses. So it's going to be tougher for us to recover, and I hope that we can recover sooner than later.
And I've got to think barbershops are going to recover very well for all of us guys once this is all done.
Actually, later today, I'm going to post how to take care of your beard during this crisis. And I do recommend in my post that don't try it on your animals. Try it on yourself first.
Sounds good. We'll leave it at that. Mayor Mike Bradley, we'll catch up again soon.
Thank you very much.
There's Sarnia Mayor Mike Bradley joining us there from City Hall. More to come on Sarnia Lambton Daily on your TV. Welcome back to Sarnia Lambton Daily. Well, throughout the pandemic, frontline responders, frontline workers have certainly been a key. We've certainly been very appreciative of their efforts and kept an eye on them. And one that we talked to earlier on our run on Sarnia Lambton Daily, we check in with again. We go back out to Petrolia. Grant Purdy, a paramedic, joins me now. And Grant, I know when we first talked, a lot of things was about screening and making sure as a paramedic you knew the situation with the patients. Where do we stand now? How are things going out there?
Hi Terry. They're going okay. There's a lot more people screening positive now because the questioning, the COVID screening tool that we use has changed. So it's still the basic ones: fever, cough, travel, shortness of breath. But now there's a whole host of other conditions that they're finding that people have had after testing positive. So they've really widened our scope of questioning. So it's going to be a lot more positive screens, which means there's going to be a lot more donning and doffing of our protective equipment.
Yeah, when you say positive screenings, that's where basically you're going to a patient and assuming they might be positive just for your own protection and the protection of anyone else between the time you see them and maybe taking them into care if necessary.
Yeah, that's right.
So that's got to be certainly adds a little more stress to it, and I guess the PPE, the personal protective equipment, does that sort of add extra time compared to the normal situations in the past where you wouldn't have to put that stuff on all the time?
It does. It takes a few minutes extra, not a whole lot of time. I mean, the more we do it, the quicker we're getting at it. It's kind of like firemen donning their bunker gear, but it still does add a couple extra minutes. But again, it's for everybody's safety, and it's totally worth it if it helps prevent the spread.
How's the stress level right now?
Stress level, it's about the same, maybe a little bit more, just because of the advanced screening now. It just adds more component to our job and to our duties on each call. So the stress level's up a little bit, but we're handling it pretty well, I think.
Do you have to almost as well, when you talk about, if someone you found some reason why, of course, you need to assume they are positive for COVID, that's got to be scary from a patient side a little bit if they think, okay, it's something else, but you're having to do this for their protection, your protection. Do you almost where they, the frontline worker, but the compassion side of you comes out to say, no, don't get, I'm doing this for our protection in terms of gearing up, the masks and everything, the shields, everything that goes with that. But I'm sure the compassion side of you says, hey, we're doing this for our protection. Don't get too, don't get too nervous. We're just working through this together.
You're absolutely right. We do that with our patients. We try and keep them calm and let them know that, this doesn't mean because you've screened positive that you necessarily are positive, but that we're doing this not only to protect ourselves, but to protect those people, their families, and other allied agencies, especially when they go to a hospital. It's just an added layer. I mean, we've done so well so far that we're trying to keep ahead of this, ahead of the curve, and it's difficult. But people, I think now, the longer it's been going on, and thanks to shows like your show, it's great because people are getting that information, and they're starting to realize when we come that we're going to be dressed up in all the gear, and I think that adds a little bit of calmness. We have to put masks on patients too now. When they go into the hospital, they have to be masked. So there's a bit of anxiety level with that, but we're doing our best to try and keep people at ease, and just letting them know that this is precaution doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to test positive, but we just have to be careful.
Last time you joined us, one of the things and the concerns was people maybe not being totally forthright during screening questions because they were worried that if they came up positive in one of those things, it would maybe impact the care they received. Are you finding now, with more information out there, people are willing to be more forthright?
I can't speak for everybody else, but personally myself, I'm finding people I haven't really had too many where I've had to go back and find out that they maybe didn't tell everything, or they weren't truthful. So I think the longer this has been going on, and the more public relations there are out there, more, as I said, great shows like yours, this is really helping us for sure.
I guess, do you find where from your job, hey, it's a stressful job anytime you're out there in the field and dealing with patients and working with some stressful situations, is it where among you, you can only really speak for yourself, but looking forward to the day when you go back to what I'll call a normal situation?
Oh, for sure. I think I can speak for everybody on that point. We're all hoping that things, when it gets back to normal. The only issue is, what's our new normal going to be? I'm wondering if we're not going to have to keep some of these distancing things and the extra cleaning and stuff. I think that's something that is important, that we don't necessarily let our guard down on when this is over. So I'm thinking maybe that it won't be completely back to normal per se as what we were used to, but I think there'll be a new normal.
For someone, if they were just sort of to take a 10,000-foot view of what a paramedic does, what has been the major difference between, let's say, a shift 3 months ago compared to a shift going on right now?
So 3 months ago, we weren't using near the personal protective equipment that we are now. We did if somebody had some sort of viral pneumonia or something where we were recommended by the doctor, say at a hospital transfer, to use droplet precautions. In situations like that, we would fully don everything. But now this is pretty much almost every call we're doing it. So
Makes a big difference that way. Just like any other frontline worker, you're in the thick of things. Is it a case now, a lot of self-monitoring going on for your own health?
Yeah, we actually, all of our workplaces, all of our paramedic stations have a little spot when we come in, and there's a thermometer there and a questionnaire, and we have to screen at the beginning of every shift. And if we have any yeses to any of those screens, then we have to call our on-duty supervisor for direction.
So what's that been like, dealing with that, where you're obviously exposed to patients per se in your normal day-to-day, but this being ramped up, especially earlier when we were seeing the number of cases increase by pretty large numbers throughout the area. It seems to have peaked right now, but even before that had to make for some nervous times. Did you find that even off duty you were still sort of having some stress about that?
Yes, I do. When I go out, if I have to go get groceries, or even if I'm just going through the drive-thru to get a coffee, I find I'm putting gloves on, just really being mindful of that social distancing, especially in grocery stores. It's been great. Businesses have been so supportive and so just really proactive with all the things that they've done, putting up plexiglass, putting floor stickers on to remind people of social distancing, the added cleaning. So I really take my hat off to the businesses as well as communities, because they're, this isn't easy for them either. It's increased cost and sweat equity to them, but everybody's stepped up to the plate and been doing their part. And it's things like that that will allow us to get back to a new normal quicker, I think.
Grant, before we let you go, we have seen a lot of recognition for frontline workers. Sometimes it comes in through hospitals, sometimes it comes through your people as well. But I have to think it's always nice when you just get that pat on the back. Well, okay, pat on the back from 6 feet away, of course. Virtual pat on the back maybe, but certainly just that recognition. I've got to think, that just goes a long way and helps to, rewarding, especially maybe after a tough shift, for example.
Yeah, it is. It's a really good morale booster. We've had people come up and want to buy us coffee or buy us a meal. People just drop notes off in front of the station saying that they're thankful for what we do. And, it's very humbling, and I really appreciate it. I mean, we all got into this job because we want to help people make a difference. And the fact that people acknowledge that means more than anything.
We'll leave it right there. Grant, we appreciate you joining us. Keep up the great work. Stay safe, and we'll talk again soon.
Thanks for having me, Terry, and you keep up the great work. This show is an excellent vehicle for getting information out to the community.
Well, thanks, Grant. All working together here. That's Grant Purdy, local paramedic, out there as one of the frontline responders dealing with COVID-19. More to come on Sarnia Lambton Daily on your TV. Recapping our top story, Ontario Premier Doug Ford announced a framework for reopening the province of Ontario. But it was strictly that, a framework. No specific dates were given, just that a 2 to 4 week decrease in COVID-19 cases and hospital patients needs to happen. The first phase would see some businesses allowed to reopen, but strictly with curbside pickup or delivery options. Some parks and outdoor facilities would also be allowed to reopen and allow more people to attend some events. That will do it for our show tonight. For all of us here at Your TV, I'm Terry Doyle. We will see you tomorrow.